The crack of a gunshot echoed through the Montana foothills as Felicity Zimmerman steadied her trembling hand, the Winchester rifle still warm against her shoulder. The deer she'd been tracking for 3 hours collapsed in the tall grass, and relief washed over her face. It wasn't pleasure that made her shoulders slump, it was necessity. This kill meant she and her ailing father might eat for another week. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving Montana Territory had taken nearly everything from the Zimmermans. What the harsh winter hadn't stolen, her father's mounting medical debts had. All that remained was their small homestead on the outskirts of Helena, their meager crops, and Artemis, her magnificent chestnut mare, the one treasure Felicity couldn't bear to part with, until today. Felicity knelt beside the fallen deer, murmuring a quiet thanks before beginning the messy work of field dressing. Her calloused hands moved with practiced efficiency, her mind elsewhere. Dr. Morgan's words from yesterday still rang in her ears. "Your father's lungs are getting worse, Miss Zimmerman. Without proper medicine and care, I fear he won't see spring." The cost of the medicine was far beyond what they had. She had already sold her mother's silver, pawned her few pieces of jewelry, and taken on mending work from town. There was only one thing left of value. Felicity wiped blood from her hands onto her worn canvas trousers and looked toward the distant silhouette of Artemis, grazing patiently at the edge of the meadow. The horse had been her companion since she was 16, a gift from her father before consumption had hollowed his chest and bent his tall frame. Now, 5 years later, Artemis was the finest horse in the county and worth enough to save her father's life. The sun was setting by the time Felicity returned to their small cabin, the deer meat wrapped carefully in burlap. She secured Artemis in the shabby barn and pressed her face against the horse's warm neck, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and saddle leather. "I'm sorry, girl," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't have a choice." Her father's ragged coughing greeted her as she entered the cabin. Frederick Zimmerman lay propped on pillows, his once powerful frame now skeletal beneath threadbare blankets. His eyes brightened seeing his daughter, though the effort of smiling triggered another coughing fit. "You get something?" he asked when he could speak. "A good-sized doe," Felicity answered, hanging her hat on a peg by the door. "Should last us a while." She busied herself at the stove, not meeting his eyes. "I'm heading to town tomorrow." "What for?" "We just got supplies last week." Felicity stirred the pot of beans slowly. "Dr. Morgan says there's a new tonic from back east, might help with your breathing." "We can't afford fancy medicine, Felicity," Frederick said, his voice gentle but firm. "You know that." She turned to face him, her jaw set in a familiar stubborn line that reminded him so much of her mother. "I'll find a way." "You're not selling Artemis." It wasn't a question. Frederick Zimmerman might be dying, but he still knew his daughter. "Pa, no, Felicity, that horse is your future." "When I'm gone, you're not going anywhere," she interrupted fiercely. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they wouldn't say. "I've made up my mind," she finally said. "I'm taking her to the horse auction tomorrow." Her father closed his eyes, too weak to argue further. "You're as stubborn as your mother was." Felicity managed a small smile. "That's how I know I'll win this argument." The night passed slowly. Felicity slept in fits and starts, listening to her father's labored breathing from the next room. Before dawn, she rose and dressed quietly, pulling on her best shirt, faded blue cotton with only one mended tear, and her least patched trousers. She needed to look respectable enough to demand a fair price. She spent an hour brushing Artemis until the mare's coat shone like burnished copper in the early morning light. She wove small braids into the horse's mane, the way she had as a girl playing at fancy horse shows they'd never attend. When she finally led Artemis from the barn, the horse pranced sideways, sensing excitement in the rare early morning saddling. "Easy, girl," Felicity murmured. "It's just a trip to town." Her father waited on the porch, leaning heavily against the doorframe. He'd clearly struggled to get himself out of bed, and Felicity felt a flash of both irritation and love. "You should be resting," she chided. Frederick ignored her concern. "You've had that horse since she was a gangly 2-year-old. She's never known another owner." "Pa, please." "This is hard enough." He nodded, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. "Take this, at least. Might help you get a better price if she's got her papers with her." Felicity took the pouch, recognizing Artemis's breeding documentation, proof of her quarter-horse lineage. Her throat tightened. "Thank you. You're doing this for me," her father said, his voice rough with emotion. "Least I can do is help you do it right." The journey to Helena took nearly 2 hours. Felicity savored every minute, memorizing the way Artemis moved beneath her, the familiar rhythm of hooves on dirt, the confident toss of the mare's head. The town came into view all too soon, a bustling hub of commerce nestled in the valley. Helena had grown considerably since gold was discovered in Last Chance Gulch 15 years earlier. What had once been a small mining camp was now the territory's capital, with proper wooden sidewalks, brick buildings, and a respectable business district. The twice-monthly horse auction drew buyers from as far as Butte and Bozeman. Felicity dismounted at the edge of town, leading Artemis the rest of the way. She wanted to delay the inevitable, but also needed to keep the mare clean before the auction. As she walked down Main Street, she noticed the usual bustle of a market day, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, wagon deliveries to the general store, and the constant flow of people moving in and out of the assayer's office. The auction yard stood at the far end of town, a large fenced corral adjacent to a sprawling livery stable. Several horses were already being unloaded as Felicity approached, her heart sinking at the sight of the auction block. "Miss Zimmerman," a voice called from behind her. "That you with Artemis?" Felicity turned to see Marcus Webb, the livery owner, crossing the street toward her. He was a fair man who had always dealt honestly with her father in better days. "Mr. Webb," she acknowledged with a nod. "Yes, I'm bringing her to auction." The older man's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. "Never thought I'd see the day. Your pa finally convinced you to part with her." "It's the other way around," she said quietly. "Pa's getting worse. We need the money for medicine." Understanding softened Webb's weathered face. "I'm sorry to hear that." He circled Artemis, whistling appreciatively. "She's looking fine. You'll get a good price today. There's buyers in from all over, including some ranch representatives from down Bozeman way." "That's good news," Felicity replied, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. Webb helped her register Artemis for the auction, scheduled for noon. "You can leave her here in the holding pen. We'll take good care of her until it's her turn." Felicity nodded, then led Artemis to the designated stall. The mare balked slightly, unaccustomed to strange surroundings. "It's all right," Felicity soothed, though her own voice trembled. When she finally closed the gate between them, Artemis whinnied in confusion. Felicity couldn't bear to look back as she walked away. She had 3 hours until the auction. Rather than torture herself watching potential buyers inspect her horse, she headed to Dr. Morgan's office to inquire about the medicine her father needed. The doctor's office sat on a side street, a modest clapboard building with J. Morgan, physician, painted on the door. The bell jingled as she entered, and the smell of antiseptic and herbs greeted her. Dr. Morgan emerged from his examination room, removing wire-rimmed spectacles. He was younger than most frontier doctors, barely 30, with a serious demeanor that inspired confidence. Miss Zimmerman, he said, genuine concern in his voice. How is your father today? About the same, Felicity answered. I've come about the medicine you mentioned. I'll have the money by this afternoon. Dr. Morgan's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Well, that's good news indeed. The shipment arrived from Denver yesterday. He hesitated. May I ask how you've managed to secure the funds? It's a considerable sum. I'm selling Artemis, she said flatly. The auction's at noon. The doctor's face registered both surprise and understanding. That's a significant sacrifice. You're sure there's no other way? Would I be here if there was? The words came out sharper than she intended. I'm sorry, doctor. It's been a difficult morning. Of course, he nodded. The tonic costs $18 for a month's supply. Your father will likely need at least 3 months' worth to see improvement. Felicity swallowed hard. $54 was an enormous sum, but Artemis was worth at least twice that. I'll return after the auction, she promised. As she turned to leave, the office door opened. A man in a tailored suit entered, removing his hat to reveal sandy hair and a clean-shaven face that stood out among the typically bearded men of Helena. Dr. Morgan, he greeted, then noticed Felicity. Pardon me, madam. I didn't mean to interrupt. Not at all, Mr. Taylor, the doctor replied. I've just finished with Miss Zimmerman. What brings you by? Picking up those headache powders for my mother, the man said, his voice carrying a slight Eastern accent. Felicity nodded politely and slipped past him, but not before noticing his striking blue eyes and the way they lingered on her face for a moment longer than was strictly proper. Back on the street, Felicity realized she was hungry. The money in her pocket was meant for a small bag of flour, but she decided a cup of coffee might steady her nerves before the auction. She headed toward the Helena Hotel's restaurant, the only place in town where a woman alone could sit without raising eyebrows. The restaurant was half full with the late breakfast crowd. Felicity found a small table in the corner and ordered coffee from a harried-looking waitress. As she waited, she unfolded the advertisement for the auction, studying the details she already knew by heart. Most horses would sell for between $15 and $40, depending on quality. Artemis, with her impressive bloodline and training, should fetch at least $100. Coffee, miss, the waitress said, placing a steaming cup before her. Anything else? Felicity shook her head. Just the coffee, thank you. As she warmed her hands around the cup, the bell above the restaurant door chimed. The man from the doctor's office entered, scanning the room briefly before his gaze settled on her. To her surprise, he approached her table. Excuse me, he said, removing his hat again. We weren't properly introduced at the doctor's. I'm Preston Taylor. Felicity regarded him with cautious curiosity. Felicity Zimmerman. Might I join you for a moment, Miss Zimmerman? I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. She hesitated, then gestured to the empty chair across from her. In a small town like Helena, it wasn't unusual for people to know of each other, though she couldn't recall ever meeting this man before. Thank you, Preston said, sitting down with an easy grace that spoke of good breeding. I've recently acquired the Double Circle Ranch south of town. Your neighbor, Mrs. Holbrook, speaks highly of your family. Mrs. Holbrook is kind, Felicity replied neutrally. You've purchased the Billings place. 6 weeks ago, he confirmed. I'm still getting acquainted with the area and its people. He paused as the waitress brought him coffee without being asked. I couldn't help overhearing at the doctor's office. You're selling a horse today, Felicity tensed. I am. Forgive my directness, but is it by choice or necessity? She bristled at the personal question. Mr. Taylor, while I appreciate your interest, my business is my own. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. Of course, I apologize. It's just that I'm in the market for quality horses and was planning to attend the auction regardless. If yours is exceptional, I'd be interested. Artemis is exceptional, Felicity stated, unable to keep pride from her voice. But she'll be available to the highest bidder like any other horse at auction. Something flickered in Preston Taylor's eyes, amusement, perhaps, or admiration at her directness. Fair enough, Miss Zimmerman. I look forward to seeing her qualities for myself. They sat in awkward silence for a moment before Preston changed the subject. Mrs. Holbrook mentioned your father was once the territory's finest horse trainer. I'm relatively new to ranching and could use advice from someone with experience. My father is ill, Felicity said flatly. He's not taking on work. I'm sorry to hear that. Preston's expression seemed genuinely sympathetic. If there's anything I can do, you can bid fairly on my horse if you're interested, Felicity interrupted, draining her coffee cup and standing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to return to the auction yard. As she left the restaurant, Felicity couldn't shake the feeling that Preston Taylor was watching her. Something about the encounter unsettled her, perhaps. It was simply the humiliation of a stranger witnessing her family's financial desperation. The auction yard was significantly busier when she returned. Cowboys, ranchers, and traders milled about, inspecting the horses in the holding pens. Felicity made her way to Artemis's stall and found two men examining her horse with obvious interest. Finest quarter horse I've seen this year, one was saying. Look at that chest depth and those clean legs. Breeding stock for sure, the other agreed. Wonder if she comes with papers. Felicity cleared her throat. She does, gentlemen. Full documentation of her sire and dam 4 generations back. The men turned, surprised. The taller one, wearing the dust-covered clothes of a working rancher, tipped his hat. This your horse, miss? Yes, Felicity confirmed. Raised her from a filly. Mind if I look at her teeth? The rancher asked. Felicity nodded, then approached Artemis, who had grown increasingly agitated with all the strangers. Easy, girl, she murmured, running a hand down the mare's neck. These men just want to see what a fine lady you are. She demonstrated Artemis's responsiveness to commands, showing how easily the horse allowed her mouth to be examined. The ranchers exchanged impressed glances. What's her name? The shorter man asked. Artemis, like the goddess, a new voice observed. Preston Taylor had appeared at the edge of the stall. Goddess of the hunt and the moon, fitting for such a magnificent animal. The other men nodded respectfully to Preston, clearly recognizing him. Felicity realized he must have made quite an impression in his short time in Helena to be acknowledged by established ranchers. Mr. Morris, Mr. Delaney, Preston greeted them. I see you've discovered Miss Zimmerman's horse. She's quite something, isn't she? That she is, the one called Morris agreed. You bidding on her, Taylor? I'm considering it, Preston replied, his eyes meeting Felicity's briefly. Though I suspect the competition will be fierce. A bell rang from the auction platform, signaling that bidding would commence in 15 minutes. The ranchers moved on to inspect other horses, but Preston lingered. You didn't mention she was named for a goddess, he said, reaching out to let Artemis sniff his hand. You didn't ask, Felicity replied. To her surprise, Artemis, normally wary of strangers, allowed Preston to stroke her nose. The mare even leaned into his touch slightly, making a soft nickering sound. She likes you, Felicity said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Preston smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. Animals are often better judges of character than people. I take it as a compliment. Before Felicity could respond, Marcus Webb appeared. It's time to move Artemis to the showing pen, Miss Zimmerman. Auction starting with the working horses, and she's third in line. Her stomach tightened with dread. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Preston stepped back. Good luck, Miss Zimmerman. I hope Artemis brings the price she deserves. Felicity led Artemis to the showing pen adjacent to the auction block. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed the mare's halter and replaced it with a simple bridle. Around them, potential buyers gathered, talking among themselves and pointing at various horses. The auctioneer, a rotund man with a booming voice, took his position on the raised platform. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Helena's finest horse auction. We've got 36 quality animals today, from plow horses to thoroughbreds. Let's begin with Lot 1. Felicity barely heard the proceedings for the first 2 horses. Her mind was racing, calculating what minimum bid she should accept. Artemis was worth at least $100, but what if the bidding stalled? Could she bring herself to accept less, knowing her father's life hung in the balance? Now presenting Lot 3, a 5-year-old chestnut quarter-horse mare. Owner states she's well-trained for both work and riding, responsive to commands, and comes with full breeding papers. Let's start the bidding at $20. Felicity held her breath as Artemis pranced nervously in the showing pen. The mare seemed to sense the importance of the moment, arching her neck and moving with exceptional grace. $20 from Mr. Delaney, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 25? 25, called a voice from the back. 30, countered Mr. Morris. The bidding quickly escalated, jumping by $5 increments. Felicity's heart pounded as the price climbed past 50, then 60, then $70. More voices joined in, creating a flurry of competition she hadn't dared hope for. I have $75 from Mr. Morris. Do I hear 80? 80, Preston Taylor's calm voice cut through the crowd. 85, called Delaney immediately. 90, Preston countered. The crowd had grown quiet, watching the duel between the 2 men. Felicity clutched the fence post, hardly daring to breathe. 95, Delaney said, his voice less certain. 100, Preston responded without hesitation. Delaney conferred briefly with his companion, then shook his head. I'm out. $100 from Mr. Taylor, the auctioneer announced. Going once, going twice. 110, called a new voice, a tall, broad-shouldered man Felicity didn't recognize. Preston turned, assessing the newcomer coolly. 120. 130, the stranger countered. The crowd murmured with excitement. Horses rarely fetched such prices in Helena. Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 150. A hush fell over the auction yard. The stranger hesitated, then shook his head in defeat. $150 going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Preston Taylor of the Double Circle Ranch. A smattering of applause broke out. Felicity stood frozen, stunned by the final price, nearly 3 times what she'd needed for her father's medicine. It was a small fortune by frontier standards, enough to see them through the winter with medicine to spare. Preston approached the showing pen where Artemis was still prancing nervously. "Congratulations, Miss Zimmerman," he said, extending his hand. "You've raised an exceptional animal." Felicity took his hand mechanically, her emotions too tangled to speak. Relief at the unexpected windfall warred with the crushing reality that she was losing Artemis. "If you'll come to the clerk's office, we can complete the paperwork," Preston continued gently, "and perhaps discuss arrangements for delivery." She nodded, finding her voice at last. "Of course." "Thank you for your generous bid, Mr. Taylor." The transaction was completed quickly. Felicity signed over Artemis's papers, accepting a bank draft for $150, the largest sum of money she'd ever held. Preston was unfailingly polite throughout, treating the matter as a routine business transaction rather than the emotional ordeal it was for her. "When would you like to take possession?" Felicity asked stiffly as they exited the clerk's office. That's what I wanted to discuss, Preston replied. I understand you live north of town. The double circle is south, as you know. Rather than make Artemis travel both directions today, perhaps I could collect her from your property tomorrow morning. Relief flooded Felicity at the unexpected reprieve. One more night with Artemis. One proper goodbye. That would be acceptable, she agreed. We're 4 miles north on the Marysville Road, the Zimmerman homestead. I know it, Preston nodded. I'll come by around 9 if that suits. It does. An awkward silence fell between them. Felicity knew she should thank him again for his generous bid, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she turned to retrieve Artemis from the showing pen. Miss Zimmerman, Preston called after her, I want you to know I'll take excellent care of her. She'll want for nothing at the double circle. Felicity paused, not turning around. See that you do, Mr. Taylor. She deserves the best. She continued walking, blinking back tears that threatened to fall. The ride home was bittersweet. Felicity took the long route, letting Artemis gallop across open meadows where they had ridden countless times before. The mare seemed to sense something important had happened, responding to Felicity's cues with extra attentiveness. We've had a good run, haven't we, girl? Felicity murmured as they crested the final hill overlooking the Zimmerman homestead. The small cabin, weathered barn, and modest fields looked particularly humble in the late afternoon light. You're going to a better place, a real ranch with other fine horses. Artemis snorted and tossed her head as if in protest. I know, Felicity said, patting the horse's neck. I don't want it either, but Pa needs that medicine and Mr. Taylor seems decent. He'll treat you well. The bank draft felt heavy in her pocket, salvation for her father, but at such a cost. As they approached the cabin, Frederick Zimmerman appeared on the porch, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Even from a distance, Felicity could see the anxious set of his shoulders. You're back late, he called as she dismounted. I was getting worried. The auction ran longer than expected, Felicity explained, securing Artemis to the hitching post. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the bank draft, holding it up for her father to see. Artemis sold for $150, Pa, $150. Frederick's eyes widened. That's more than we could have hoped for. Enough for your medicine and to get us through winter, Felicity confirmed. And the buyer, Mr. Taylor from the double circle, he's coming to collect her tomorrow morning. We have one more night with her. Her father studied her face. You're not happy. I'm relieved, she corrected. There's a difference. Frederick nodded, understanding in his tired eyes. Come inside. You must be hungry after such a day. They shared a simple dinner of venison stew from yesterday's hunt. Felicity described the auction, Preston Taylor's unexpected interest in Artemis, and her visit to Dr. Morgan's office. This Taylor fellow, Frederick mused. He knew to these parts. Don't recall a Taylor owning the old Billings place. He said he bought it 6 weeks ago. Seems to have money, Eastern money if I had to guess. His clothes are too fine for a working rancher. Her father's expression turned thoughtful. Might be good or bad. Some of these Easterners come out thinking they know ranching from books, run their stock into the ground before the first winter. He mentioned wanting advice from an experienced horseman, Felicity recalled. Said Mrs. Holbrook told him you were the best in the territory. A shadow of pride crossed Frederick's gaunt face. That was a long time ago. Not so long, Felicity insisted. And it's still true. They spent the evening in companionable silence, Frederick whittling by the fire while Felicity mended a tear in her work shirt. Neither mentioned Artemis's impending departure, though it hung in the air between them like an invisible cloud. Later, Felicity slipped out to the barn. She spread fresh hay in Artemis's stall and brushed the mare until her coat gleamed in the lantern light. The horse nuzzled her shoulder affectionately. "I'll miss you too," Felicity whispered, burying her face in Artemis's mane to muffle a sob. She didn't sleep well that night. Dreams of galloping across endless meadows gave way to images of Artemis disappearing into the horizon, always just beyond reach. When dawn finally broke, Felicity was already dressed and in the barn, determined to make Artemis's last morning with them special. She fed the mare the best oats they had, then led her to the small creek behind the property where Artemis had always loved to splash in the shallows. The horse seemed to sense the importance of the day, staying especially close to Felicity's side. By 8 o'clock, Felicity had Artemis groomed to perfection, her tack cleaned and ready for the journey to her new home. Frederick insisted on coming to the barn to say his own goodbye, leaning heavily on Felicity's arm. "You raised her well," he told his daughter, patting Artemis's flank. "Your mother would be proud of the horsewoman you've become." Felicity swallowed the lump in her throat. "I learned from the best." At precisely 9 o'clock, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Preston Taylor's arrival. Felicity stepped out of the barn to see him riding a handsome black gelding, leading a bay packhorse laden with supplies. He wore simpler clothes than yesterday, practical riding gear, rather than the tailored suit, but still carried himself with that unmistakable confidence. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman," he called, dismounting smoothly. "I hope I'm not too early." "You're right on time, Mr. Taylor," she replied, suddenly aware of her work-worn appearance. She'd been so focused on preparing Artemis that she'd given no thought to her own impression. Preston secured his horses to the fence. "I thought I might need supplies for the journey back," he explained, gesturing to the packhorse. "The double circle is a good 4 hours' ride." Felicity nodded. "Artemis is ready, and this is my father, Frederick Zimmerman." Preston approached, extending his hand. "Mr. Zimmerman, it's an honor. Your reputation with horses precedes you." Frederick sized up the younger man, then accepted the handshake. "You've bought yourself a fine animal, Mr. Taylor. Treat her well." "I intend to," Preston assured him. "In fact, I was hoping to ask your advice on integrating her into my herd. I've got mostly geldings and a few older mares. Artemis will be the youngest female." Frederick's interest visibly piqued. As the men began discussing horse management, Felicity slipped back into the barn, needing a final moment alone with Artemis. "It's time, girl," she whispered, stroking the mare's velvet nose. "Be good for Mr. Taylor. Show him what a special girl you are." When she led Artemis out of the barn, the men's conversation halted. Preston's eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of the gleaming chestnut horse. "She looks even finer in the daylight," he remarked. "She knows she's going somewhere," Felicity said, unable to keep the sadness from her voice. She handed Preston the reins, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "Everything you need is in the saddlebags: her brush, hoof pick, and favorite treats. She likes apples best, but will do anything for a sugar cube." Preston nodded, absorbing these details seriously. "Thank you. I can see she's been deeply loved." "She still is," Felicity corrected, her voice catching. An awkward silence fell. Frederick cleared his throat. "Mr. Taylor was just explaining his plans for the double circle. Sounds like he's making good improvements to the Billings place." "Yes," Preston confirmed. "I've hired men to repair the fencing and expand the corrals. The main house needed work too. It had been empty for nearly a year before I purchased it." Felicity nodded politely, though she couldn't bring herself to care about Preston Taylor's ranch improvements. All she could focus on was Artemis, shifting nervously between them. "I should be going," Preston said, seeming to sense her distress. "It's a long ride back." "Of course," Felicity managed. She reached out to stroke Artemis's neck one last time. "Goodbye, girl." Preston mounted his gelding, then carefully took Artemis's reins. The mare whinnied, sensing separation from her longtime home. "Easy," Preston soothed. "We're going to be friends, you and I." "Mr. Taylor," Felicity called suddenly. Would you write to let me know how she settles in?" Preston's expression softened. "I'll do better than that, Miss Zimmerman. Once your father is feeling stronger, you should both come visit the double circle, see for yourselves how she's faring." "That's kind, but we'd be much obliged," Frederick interrupted. "Perhaps when spring comes." Preston nodded. "Spring it is, then." He tipped his hat to them both. "Good day to you." Felicity stood motionless as Preston guided both horses away from the homestead. Artemis resisted briefly, turning her head back toward Felicity, but Preston handled her with gentle firmness. The mare eventually settled, falling into step beside his gelding. "He knows horses," Frederick observed quietly. "Did you see how he anticipated her balking? Didn't jerk the reins or lose patience?" "I noticed," Felicity admitted. She continued watching until the riders disappeared over the hill, taking a piece of her heart with them. The following weeks brought significant changes to the Zimmerman homestead. With the money from Artemis's sale, Felicity purchased 6 months' worth of Dr. Morgan's tonic, repaired their leaking roof, and stocked the root cellar with provisions for the coming winter. Frederick began showing small improvements within days of starting the medicine. His coughing spells grew shorter. His appetite returned, and he could walk short distances without becoming winded. But for Felicity, the improvements in their circumstances couldn't fill the void left by Artemis's absence. She threw herself into work around the homestead, rising before dawn and collapsing into exhausted sleep each night. The empty stall in the barn remained a painful reminder of what she'd sacrificed. True to his word, Preston Taylor sent a letter 2 weeks after taking Artemis. His handwriting was neat and measured, the paper of fine quality. "Dear Miss Zimmerman, I hope this letter finds you and your father well. I wanted to inform you that Artemis has settled admirably at the double circle. After some initial adjustment, she has established herself quite firmly in the hierarchy of my small herd. She particularly enjoys the eastern pasture, where the creek runs wide and shallow. She remains in excellent health and spirits, though I confess she sometimes looks toward the north, as if remembering her former home. I have begun working with her daily and find her intelligence and responsiveness remarkable. You trained her beautifully. Your father mentioned his experience with breeding programs. When time permits, I would value his insights on expanding my stock. The double circle's future success may well depend on producing horses of Artemis's quality. Please give Mr. Zimmerman my regards, and know that Artemis is well cared for. Respectfully, Preston Taylor. Felicity read the letter multiple times, finding both comfort and renewed pain in Preston's detailed account of Artemis's new life. She composed a brief response, thanking him for the update and reporting on her father's improved condition. She mentioned Frederick's willingness to discuss horse breeding when his health permitted, but made no reference to Preston's invitation to visit in the spring. That possibility seemed both too distant and too painful to contemplate. October gave way to November, bringing the first snows and confining the Zimmermans largely to their cabin. Felicity made weekly trips to Helena for supplies and Frederick's medicine, finding the journey lonelier without Artemis beneath her. She borrowed Mrs. Holbrook's old mare when necessary, but it wasn't the same. On one such trip in early December, she encountered Dr. Morgan outside the general store, loading supplies into his buggy. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her warmly. "I was hoping to see you. How is your father responding to the tonic?" "Better than I dared hope," Felicity replied honestly. "His color is returning and he's gained weight. The coughing is less frequent too." Excellent, the doctor nodded. And you, how are you faring? Felicity was taken aback by the personal nature of the question. I'm well enough, she answered cautiously. Dr. Morgan's kind eyes studied her face. It was a great sacrifice selling that horse. I know what she meant to you. Felicity looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. It was necessary. Yes, but necessary things can still hurt, the doctor observed. Your father is fortunate to have such a devoted daughter. Before Felicity could respond, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Preston Taylor emerging from the mercantile, carrying several packages. Miss Zimmerman, he said, approaching with a genuine smile. What a pleasant surprise. Mr. Taylor, she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her wind-chapped face and practical winter clothing. Are you in town for supplies? Among other things, he confirmed. How is your father? Improving steadily, thank you. And Artemis? Is she adapting to the double circle? Preston's expression brightened. Splendidly. Did you receive my letter? Yes, thank you, it was. Comforting to know she's doing well. An awkward silence fell. Dr. Morgan cleared his throat. I should continue my rounds. Miss Zimmerman, please tell your father I'll call on him next week. Mr. Taylor, good day to you. As the doctor departed, Preston shifted his packages. May I help you with your errands, Miss Zimmerman? I've finished mine and have my wagon just down the street. Felicity hesitated. That's kind, but I wouldn't want to delay your return journey. No delay at all, Preston assured her. I'm staying in town tonight. The Double Circle's foreman is with me and we have business at the land office tomorrow morning. Against her better judgment, Felicity found herself accepting his offer. They walked side by side down Helena's main street, Preston adjusting his longer stride to match hers. He asked thoughtful questions about her father's health and their preparations for winter, showing genuine interest in their well-being. I've been meaning to call on you both, he admitted as they approached the apothecary. But I wasn't sure if my presence might be unwelcome, given the circumstances of our acquaintance. Felicity glanced at him, surprised by his candor. You mean because you bought Artemis? Yes. I thought perhaps seeing me might be a painful reminder. She considered this. It's true that losing her has been difficult. But you paid fairly more than fairly, and from your letter, it sounds like she's well cared for. She is, Preston assured her. In fact, he hesitated. Would you allow me to call on you both next week? I have a business proposition for your father that might interest him. Curiosity piqued, Felicity nodded. I'm sure he would welcome the company. Winter can be isolating. Excellent. Would Wednesday be convenient around midday? That would be fine, Felicity agreed, wondering what proposition Preston could possibly have for her ailing father. They completed her errands efficiently, Preston insisting on carrying her purchases. When they parted at the edge of town, he tipped his hat with a formality that somehow didn't feel stiff. Until Wednesday, Miss Zimmerman. As Felicity rode Mrs. Holbrook's mare home, she found herself wondering about Preston Taylor. He remained something of a mystery, clearly wealthy, but without the condescension often shown by Eastern transplants. He was unfailingly polite, yet there was something guarded in his manner, as if he kept part of himself deliberately hidden. Frederick was intrigued by news of Preston's impending visit. A business proposition, you say? Wonder what the man has in mind. I have no idea, Felicity admitted. Perhaps he wants advice on his breeding program, as he mentioned in his letter. Her father looked thoughtful. Might be good to have something useful to do again. A man needs purpose. The days until Wednesday passed slowly. Felicity found herself unusually concerned with the state of their modest cabin, scrubbing the floors and polishing the few pieces of decent furniture they possessed. She told herself it was simply respect for a guest, but couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing Preston again. Wednesday dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the landscape. Felicity rose early to prepare a decent meal venison stew with the last of their summer vegetables and fresh bread she'd baked the previous day. By mid-morning, the cabin was as presentable as their limited means allowed. Frederick teased her gently about her preparations. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to impress Mr. Taylor," Felicity flushed. "Don't be ridiculous. He's a guest, that's all." Her father's knowing smile only deepened her embarrassment. "Of course, just a guest who happens to be an eligible bachelor with his own ranch. Pa. It's not like that at all. He bought Artemis, that's our only connection." "If you say so," Frederick replied, clearly unconvinced. "Though I can't help noticing you've worn your good dress and pinned your hair up special." Before Felicity could formulate a suitably cutting response, the sound of approaching hoofbeats silenced their banter. She moved to the window to see Preston guiding a sleigh up the snowy path to their cabin, pulled by two matching gray horses. The sight was unexpectedly elegant against the rugged Montana landscape. "Came in a sleigh," Frederick observed, joining her at the window. "Smart man. Better than trying to get a wagon through these drifts." Preston halted the sleigh near their porch and secured the horses before approaching the cabin. He wore a heavy wool coat and carried a large wooden crate. Felicity opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Taylor," she greeted him, suddenly self-conscious. "Please come in out of the cold." "Thank you, Miss Zimmerman," he replied, stomping snow from his boots before entering. "Mr. Zimmerman, good to see you up and about. You're looking considerably better than when we last met." Frederick nodded. "That fancy medicine is doing its work, that and my daughter's cooking. Speaking of which, she's prepared a fine stew if you'd join us for dinner." "I'd be honored," Preston said, setting down the crate. "And I've brought a few things from town, some coffee, preserves, and a bottle of decent brandy. Medicinal purposes, of course," he added with a small smile. They settled around the table, the conversation flowing more easily than Felicity had anticipated. Preston described recent improvements to the double circle, including a new barn he'd commissioned and the arrival of additional horses purchased from a breeder in Colorado. Frederick asked knowledgeable questions about the ranch's operations, revealing his deep understanding of the cattle business despite his years focused on horses. After the meal, Preston finally broached the purpose of his visit. "Mr. Zimmerman, I've come with a proposal that might interest you. As Miss Zimmerman may have mentioned, I'm relatively new to ranching. While I understand the business aspects, I lack practical experience, particularly with horses." Frederick nodded, encouraging him to continue. "The double circle needs an experienced horseman, someone who can develop a proper breeding program, train the stock, and advise on acquisitions. I believe you're exactly the man I need." Felicity stared in surprise. "You're offering my father a job, a partnership of sorts," Preston clarified. "I would provide the capital and facilities. Mr. Zimmerman would contribute his expertise. We'd share in the profits from any horses bred and sold under this arrangement." Frederick leaned forward, clearly interested, despite his attempt to appear casual. "That's a generous offer, but I'm not exactly in prime working condition these days." "Your mind is sound and your knowledge intact," Preston countered. "I have capable ranch hands for the physical labor. What I need is your guidance." He paused. "To be frank, I bought Artemis not just for her quality, but as a foundation mare for a breeding program I hope to establish. She's exceptional, but I need someone who understands bloodlines to help me build on that potential." Felicity and her father exchanged glances. The offer was unexpected but potentially life-changing. A partnership with the double circle would provide security far beyond what their struggling homestead could offer. "Where would this arrangement have us living?" Frederick asked cautiously. "The double circle has a foreman's house smaller than the main ranch house, but comfortable. It's been recently renovated. You and Miss Zimmerman would have privacy and independence, but be close enough to the operations to make your involvement convenient." "And my duties specifically?" Frederick pressed. "Initially, assessing the current stock and helping plan acquisitions for spring, then developing a breeding strategy, focusing on quality quarter horses like Artemis. As your health permits, you might take on training responsibilities." Frederick rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "And my daughter's position in this arrangement?" Preston's eyes flickered briefly to Felicity. "Miss Zimmerman would be welcome to pursue whatever role interests her. From what I've observed, she has considerable skills with horses herself. The double circle could certainly benefit from her contributions, paid accordingly, of course." Felicity felt a conflicting rush of emotions. The practical part of her recognized the opportunity this presented: steady income, comfortable lodging, and meaningful work for her father. But another part rebelled at the idea of being beholden to Preston Taylor, of living on his property, surrounded by reminders of Artemis and what she'd lost. "It's a significant decision," Preston acknowledged, seeming to sense their hesitation. "I don't expect an answer immediately. Take time to discuss it privately. I'll be in Helena until Friday if you have questions." "We appreciate that," Frederick said. "It's certainly worth considering." The conversation shifted to less consequential topics, but Felicity remained distracted, her mind racing with the implications of Preston's offer. When he finally prepared to leave, the short December day was already fading toward dusk. "I should return to town before dark," Preston said, retrieving his coat. "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Zimmerman. The stew was excellent." "You're welcome," she replied automatically. At the door, Preston turned back. "Regardless of your decision about my proposal, I hope you'll still consider visiting the double circle in spring. I know Artemis would be pleased to see you." The simple statement caught Felicity off guard, reminding her of the emotional connection that still bound her to the horse. "Perhaps we will," she managed. After Preston departed, Frederick settled in his chair by the fire, his expression thoughtful. "Well, daughter, it seems we have a decision to make." "Do we?" Felicity questioned, busying herself with clearing the table. "This homestead is all we have." "Could you really leave it? This land has given us what it can," her father replied pragmatically. "We're surviving, not thriving. Taylor's offer means security and a chance for me to do meaningful work again." He paused. "And perhaps a future for you beyond caring for your ailing father." "I don't mind caring for you," Felicity protested. "I know you don't," Frederick said gently. "But you deserve more from life than this constant struggle. You're 21, Felicity. You should be building your own life, not sacrificing everything for mine." Felicity sat heavily in the chair opposite him. "What if it doesn't work out? We'd have nothing to fall back on." "Life rarely offers guarantees," her father observed, "but I'm a good judge of character. Preston Taylor struck me as an honest man making a genuine offer." He studied her face carefully. "Unless there's another reason you're hesitant, something about Taylor himself that troubles you." "No," Felicity admitted after a moment. "He's been nothing but respectful and fair," she sighed. "It's just living at the double circle would mean seeing Artemis regularly. I'm not sure if that would be healing or simply reopen the wound." Understanding softened Frederick's weathered features. Letting her go was necessary but painful. Seeing her thriving might help you make peace with that decision. They discussed the matter long into the evening, weighing the practical advantages against the emotional complications. By morning, they had reached a tentative decision, though Felicity insisted on one condition. 2 days later, they traveled to Helena to meet with Preston at the hotel restaurant. Despite the cold, Felicity felt feverishly warm with nervousness as they entered the elegant dining room. Preston rose immediately upon seeing them, his expression brightening. "Mr. Zimmerman, Miss Zimmerman, I'm delighted you could come." Once seated and orders placed, Frederick got straight to the point. "We've considered your proposal, Mr. Taylor, and are inclined to accept with one condition." Preston's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm listening." "We wish to retain ownership of our homestead," Frederick explained. "We may not live there under this arrangement, but I won't sell the land my wife and I worked so hard to claim." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "A reasonable condition. The land will remain yours, of course. You might consider leasing the fields to a neighboring farmer to keep them productive and generate some additional income." "A sound suggestion," Frederick agreed. "Then it seems we have an agreement." "Excellent," Preston smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his features. "I suggest you both come to the Double Circle after the new year. January can be difficult for travel, but it would give you time to settle before spring work begins in earnest." As the men discussed practical details of the arrangement, Felicity found herself studying Preston more carefully than before. There was an intensity about him that she hadn't fully appreciated, a focused energy that suggested a man driven by specific goals rather than mere ambition. She wondered, not for the first time, what had brought a clearly educated Easterner to the Montana frontier. "Miss Zimmerman," Preston's voice interrupted her thoughts, "you've been very quiet. I hope you're comfortable with this arrangement." Felicity straightened. "Yes, Mr. Taylor. Though I confess I'm curious about what role you envision for me at the Double Circle." "That would depend largely on your interests," Preston replied. "Your father speaks highly of your skills with horses. The ranch could certainly use someone with your abilities for training and daily care. However, if you prefer other pursuits, we could discuss alternatives." "Horses are my life," Felicity said simply. "I would welcome the opportunity to work with them again." "Then it's settled," Preston declared, raising his coffee cup in a small toast, "to new beginnings at the Double Circle." The following weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. The Zimmermans packed their limited possessions, arranged for Mrs. Holbrook's son to check on their property periodically, and prepared for the move to the Double Circle. The prospect of leaving the only home Felicity had known since childhood filled her with both trepidation and a reluctant excitement. On a clear, bitingly cold morning in early January, Preston arrived with his foreman and 2 wagons to transport the Zimmermans and their belongings. The journey to the Double Circle took most of the day, following the road south from Helena through snow-covered valleys and pine forests. As they crested a ridge in the late afternoon, Preston halted the lead wagon. "There it is," he said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley. "The Double Circle." Felicity leaned forward, taking in her first view of what would be her new home. The ranch was larger than she had imagined, a substantial main house built of squared logs, several outbuildings, 2 large barns, and extensive corrals and paddocks. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and even from this distance, she could make out the figures of men working near the barns. "It's impressive," Frederick acknowledged. "Bigger operation than Billings ran." "I've expanded considerably," Preston confirmed. "The ranch was run down when I purchased it. Most of what you see has been built or renovated in the past 6 months." As they descended into the valley, Felicity couldn't help scanning the paddocks for a glimpse of Artemis. She spotted several horses in the nearest enclosure, but couldn't distinguish individual animals at this distance. The wagons pulled up to a tidy cabin situated about 100 yards from the main house, close enough to be convenient, but far enough to offer privacy. It was larger than their homestead cabin, with a covered porch and glass windows instead of oiled paper. "The foreman's house," Preston announced. "Though I suppose we should call it the horse master's house now." As they disembarked, a middle-aged woman emerged from the main house and approached briskly. "Mr. Taylor, welcome back," she called. "Everything's prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Preston replied. "May I introduce Frederick Zimmerman and his daughter, Felicity? Mr. Zimmerman will be overseeing our horse breeding program, and Miss Zimmerman will be assisting with training." "The Zimmermans. This is Mrs. Chen, who manages the household affairs for the Double Circle." The woman nodded respectfully. "I've prepared a hot meal for you in your cabin. The stove's been lit since morning, so you'll find it warm. If you need anything, just send word to the main house." "That's very kind," Frederick said. "We're grateful for the welcome, Mrs." Chen's competent presence was reassuring to Felicity, who had worried about being the only woman in a ranch full of men. As they unloaded their belongings, Preston's foreman, Mr. Hollister, and 2 ranch hands assisted efficiently. "I'll leave you to settle in," Preston said once everything had been moved inside. "Perhaps tomorrow, if you're rested, I can show you both around the property and introduce you to the staff." "That would be fine," Frederick agreed. "And I'm eager to see your horse stock, particularly that mare we've heard so much about." A smile flickered across Preston's face. "Artemis is doing splendidly. I think you'll be impressed with how she's taken to her new home." After Preston and his men departed, Felicity and Frederick explored their new quarters. The cabin was simple but well-appointed 2 bedrooms, a comfortable living area with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with an iron stove and pump for water. Mrs. Chen had indeed prepared a welcoming meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. "Taylor's done well by us," Frederick observed as they ate. "This is more comfortable than I expected." Felicity nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Somewhere on this ranch, Artemis was settling in for the night. The knowledge that she was so close yet still not Felicity's created a peculiar ache. "You're thinking about her," her father said softly. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows you as I do." He reached across the table to pat her hand. "Tomorrow will be difficult, seeing her again, but perhaps it's the first step in healing." Felicity wasn't certain she wanted that particular wound to heal. The pain of losing Artemis had become a familiar companion, a reminder of what she'd sacrificed for her father's health. Yet she couldn't deny the anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing her beloved horse again. She slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with running horses and Preston Taylor's enigmatic blue eyes. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold, typical January weather for Montana territory. Felicity rose early, drawn to the window by the sounds of the ranch awakening. Men moved between buildings, steam rising from their breath in the frigid air. In the nearest paddock, several horses huddled together for warmth. A knock at the door announced Preston's arrival shortly after breakfast. He wore practical ranching clothes and carried an extra coat. "I thought Miss Zimmerman might need this for our tour," he explained, handing the heavy sheepskin coat to Felicity. "The wind cuts sharply across the open areas of the ranch." The gesture was thoughtful and unexpected. Felicity accepted the coat with murmured thanks, noting it was of far better quality than anything she owned. Preston led them first to the main house, a substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch and many windows. Inside, it was comfortably furnished with a mixture of frontier practicality and Eastern refinement: solid wooden furniture, woven rugs, and a surprising number of books lining built-in shelves. "I live here with Mrs. Chen, who manages the household, and Mr. Hollister, my foreman," Preston explained. "There's a bunkhouse for the ranch hands near the main barn." The tour continued to the various outbuildings, a smokehouse, workshop, and storage sheds. Preston explained the operation of the ranch in detail, from the cattle grazing on winter pasture to plans for spring planting in the fields. Finally, they approached the larger of the two barns, a new structure with a high roof and substantial doors. Felicity's heart began to race as Preston pushed one door open, revealing a well-organized interior with 2 rows of stalls. "This is our main stable," Preston explained. "We keep the working horses and special breeding stock here. The secondary barn houses the general ranch horses." Felicity barely heard him, her eyes scanning the stalls. Several horses nickered at their entrance, curious heads appearing over stall doors. And then, halfway down the row, she saw her Artemis, her distinctive chestnut coat gleaming in the light from the high windows. The mare recognized Felicity instantly. She whinnied loudly, pawing at her stall door with obvious excitement. Felicity froze, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. "I believe she remembers you," Preston said softly. "She's been well behaved, but somewhat reserved with everyone here. Not truly bonded with anyone." Frederick squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Go on, Felicity. She's waiting for you." As if in a dream, Felicity moved toward Artemis's stall. The horse stretched her neck as far as possible over the door, nostrils flaring as she took in Felicity's familiar scent. "Hello, girl," Felicity whispered, reaching out to touch the velvet nose. "I've missed you too." Artemis nickered softly, nudging Felicity's hand with unmistakable affection. Something tight in Felicity's chest began to loosen, tears pricking at her eyes. "She's in excellent condition," Frederick observed, joining his daughter. "You've taken good care of her, Mr. Taylor." "She's special," Preston replied simply. "Even among quality horses, she stands out." Felicity opened the stall door and stepped inside, running her hands over Artemis's neck and shoulders. The horse leaned into her touch, clearly delighted by the reunion. "Has she been worked regularly?" "Daily," Preston confirmed. "Light riding mostly to keep her fit." "I was waiting for your father's advice before making breeding decisions." They spent the next hour inspecting the other horses in the stable. Preston had assembled an impressive collection, 15 horses of various breeds, each selected with an eye toward specific qualities. Frederick asked knowledgeable questions about each animal's background and training, clearly enjoying the return to his area of expertise. "You've made some excellent choices," he told Preston as they exited the barn. "With a few strategic additions in spring, you could develop one of the finest breeding programs in the territory." Preston nodded, clearly pleased by the assessment. "That's exactly my hope. Quality horseflesh is increasingly valuable as the territory develops." He turned to Felicity. "Would you like to ride Artemis while you're here? She's still yours in spirit if not in ownership." The offer caught Felicity by surprise. Yes, I would like that very much." "Excellent. Perhaps tomorrow if the weather holds." "There are some beautiful riding trails through the southern pastures." The invitation seemed innocent enough, but Frederick's raised eyebrow suggested he saw more in it than a simple courtesy. Felicity herself wasn't certain what to make of Preston's continued thoughtfulness. Was it merely the consideration of an employer for valued workers? Or something more personal? That evening, as Felicity prepared a simple supper in their new kitchen, Frederick brought up the subject directly. "Taylor seems particularly attentive to your comfort and happiness." Felicity concentrated on slicing potatoes. "He's being a good host, nothing more." "Is that so?" her father mused. "The man offers you his personal coat, suggests private rides, and can't seem to take his eyes off you when he thinks no one's looking." "Pa." Felicity protested, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. That's ridiculous. Is it? I may be old and sick, but I'm not blind. Frederick settled into a chair at the kitchen table. The question is, how do you feel about his interest? Felicity set down her knife, considering the question seriously. I don't know, she admitted finally. He's been kind and fair in all our dealings. He seems genuinely committed to building something worthwhile here, but he's still the man who bought Artemis, her father finished for her. The transaction that brought you pain, even if it was necessary. Yes, Felicity nodded. And I can't help wondering if his offer of partnership was motivated by something beyond business interests. Frederick smiled slightly. Would that be so terrible? You're a beautiful, capable young woman. Any man with sense would be interested. Felicity resumed her potato slicing with unnecessary vigor. I'm not looking for a husband, Pa, especially not one who might see me as part of a package deal with your horse expertise. Fair enough, Frederick conceded. Though I suspect Mr. Taylor values you for far more than that. He paused. Just keep an open mind, daughter. Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected directions. The following day dawned clear but less bitterly cold, ideal for riding. Preston arrived mid-morning, leading both Artemis and his own black gelding, already saddled. I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the ranch, he told Felicity. If your father doesn't mind sparing you for a few hours. Frederick waved them off with suspicious enthusiasm. Go on. I've got ranch accounts to review with Hollister. Perfect indoor work for an old man. The first few minutes of the ride were awkward, with Felicity acutely conscious of Preston's presence beside her. But Artemis's familiar gait beneath her was so comforting, so right, that she gradually relaxed. They rode south from the ranch buildings, following a well-used trail that wound through stands of pine and open meadows. How does it feel to be on her back again? Preston asked as they paused atop a small rise overlooking a frozen creek. Like coming home, Felicity admitted. She moves exactly as I remember. She's never responded to me the way she does to you, Preston observed. I can ride her competently enough, but there's no true connection, not like what I'm seeing now. Felicity stroked Artemis's neck affectionately. We grew up together. That creates a bond that's hard to replace. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft huffing of the horse's breath in the cold air. Preston eventually guided them to a sheltered clearing where a fallen log provided a natural seating area. I thought we might rest the horses briefly, he suggested. I've brought coffee if you'd like some. From his saddlebag, Preston produced a small metal flask and 2 tin cups. The coffee was hot and liberally sweetened with sugar, a luxury Felicity rarely indulged in. They sat side by side on the log, horses ground tied nearby. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Taylor? Felicity ventured after several minutes of silence. I think, given our circumstances, you might call me Preston, he replied with a small smile. And yes, you may ask. What brought you to Montana? You're clearly Eastern educated, with means to have settled anywhere. Why choose a remote ranch in the territories? Preston contemplated his coffee for a long moment. The direct answer is that I wanted a fresh start, away from Boston society and its expectations. He paused. My father was a successful merchant who expected me to follow in his footsteps. When he died 2 years ago, I inherited his business and the burden of his ambitions. You didn't want the business, Felicity prompted when he fell silent. I wanted something of my own making, Preston clarified. Not something handed to me by virtue of birth. I sold the business to my father's partners, settled my mother comfortably, and came west to build something that would succeed or fail on my own merits. The admission surprised Felicity. She had assumed he was another wealthy Easterner playing at frontier life. That's Admirable. Many men would have simply enjoyed the inheritance. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but I was raised to believe that a man's worth lies in what he creates, not what he's given. He glanced at her. Not unlike you, I imagine. You've clearly built your life on hard work rather than expectations of rescue. The observation was perceptive enough to make Felicity uncomfortable. Necessity is a powerful teacher. Indeed. Preston set his empty cup aside. Now may I ask you something? Felicity nodded cautiously. Why did you really agree to come to the double circle? Was it solely for your father's benefit, or was there something more? The directness of the question caught her off guard. My father's health and security were certainly my primary concerns. But not your only ones, Preston pressed gently. Felicity stared out at the winter landscape, gathering her thoughts. No, she admitted finally. I also came because of Artemis. The chance to see her again, perhaps even work with her regularly. It was a powerful incentive. Preston nodded, seeming to accept this answer. But then he asked, and was I any part of your consideration at all? Felicity's gaze snapped to his face, finding his blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mr. Taylor, Preston, he corrected softly. Preston, she amended. I barely know you, we've met only a handful of times. That's not really an answer, he observed, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. Felicity stood abruptly. We should return. My father will be wondering where we are. Preston rose more slowly. You're right, of course. But Felicity, he waited until she met his eyes. I hope you'll consider that some connections don't require years to form. Sometimes they happen in an instant, over a horse auction or a cup of coffee in the snow. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Felicity was unsettled by Preston's directness, and even more by her own reaction to it. She had come to the double circle for practical reasons: her father's health, financial security, and proximity to Artemis. The possibility of personal entanglement with Preston Taylor had never been part of her calculations. Yet she couldn't deny a growing awareness of him as more than an employer or Artemis's new owner. There was something compelling about his combination of Eastern refinement and frontier practicality, his obvious intelligence and unexpected kindness. When they returned to the stables, Preston helped her dismount, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. Thank you for riding with me today, he said. I hope we can make it a regular occurrence. Perhaps, Felicity replied non-committally, though I expect to be busy learning my duties here. Of course, he nodded. Speaking of which, I was hoping you might take primary responsibility for Artemis's daily care and exercise. She clearly responds best to you. The offer was too perfectly aligned with Felicity's deepest wish to be coincidental. That's very thoughtful, she said cautiously. But aren't you concerned about the appearance of favoritism? Preston met her gaze steadily. I'm concerned with what works best for the ranch and its animals. Artemis thrives under your care, that's simply a fact. He paused. If others choose to see more in the arrangement, that's their concern, not ours. Felicity wasn't entirely convinced, but the opportunity to work with Artemis daily was too precious to decline. Then I accept and thank you. In the weeks that followed, Felicity settled into life at the double circle with surprising ease. Her days took on a pleasant rhythm: mornings spent working with the horses, particularly Artemis. Afternoons assisting her father with the development of breeding plans or helping with general ranch duties. Evenings in the cozy cabin, reading by lamplight or discussing the day's events. Frederick thrived in his new role as the ranch's horsemaster. His health continued to improve with regular medication and reduced physical strain, and his expertise earned him the respect of even the most skeptical ranch hands. He and Preston developed a warm, working relationship, spending hours discussing bloodlines and training techniques. Preston himself remained something of a puzzle to Felicity. He was unfailingly courteous and professional in their daily interactions, with no further mention of personal feelings. Yet she often caught him watching her, with that same intensity she'd noticed during their ride. He found reasons to seek her company, consulting her on horse matters that could easily have been directed to her father, inviting both Zimmermans for dinner at the main house, bringing books he thought might interest her. February brought milder weather and the first stirrings of spring planning. The ranch buzzed with preparations for calving season and discussions of which mares might be bred. Artemis, now fully settled and clearly delighted with Felicity's daily presence, was central to these conversations. "She's the perfect foundation for our program," Frederick explained one evening as he, Felicity, and Preston reviewed breeding charts in the main house study. "Her conformation is exceptional, and she's proven her intelligence and trainability. If we breed her to that bay stallion from the Carpenter Ranch, we could produce foals with both speed and cow sense." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "Carpenter's asking a steep stud fee, but I agree the match seems ideal." He glanced at Felicity. "What do you think?" "You know Artemis better than anyone." Felicity considered the question seriously. "The bloodlines complement each other well, and temperamentally, I think it's a good match. Carpenter's stallion is spirited but not mean, important for breeding." "Then it's settled," Preston decided. "I'll ride to the Carpenter place next week and make arrangements." As they gathered their papers at the conclusion of the meeting, Preston cleared his throat. "I've been meaning to mention Helena's holding its annual Founders' Day celebration next Saturday. There's a dinner and dance at the hotel. I thought perhaps you both might like to attend. It would be an opportunity to meet more of the local ranchers and townspeople." Frederick shook his head. "Dancing's not much use to these old bones anymore, but Felicity should go. She's had precious little entertainment these past years, caring for me." "Pa," Felicity began to protest. "I'd be honored to escort you," Preston said quickly. "Unless the idea is completely objectionable, put that way, refusal seemed both ungracious and cowardly." "Not objectionable," Felicity conceded, "but I have nothing suitable to wear for such an occasion." "That's easily remedied," Preston replied. "Mrs. Chen is traveling to Helena tomorrow for supplies. She could help you select something appropriate, my treat." "I couldn't possibly. Consider it part of your compensation," Preston suggested. "The double circle should be properly represented at community functions, after all." Frederick's barely concealed smile made it clear he saw through this transparent justification. "Excellent idea. Mrs. Chen has good taste, I'm sure." And so Felicity found herself, the following day, in Helena's most exclusive dry goods store, being fitted for a proper dress under Mrs. Chen's practical supervision. The older woman had an unexpected knowledge of fashion and a definite opinion on what would suit Felicity. "Blue," she declared, examining several bolts of fabric, "to match your eyes. And something simple but elegant, no fussy ruffles or excessive trimming." The resulting gown, hastily constructed by the store's seamstress, was indeed beautiful cornflower blue wool with subtle black piping and a neckline that revealed more of Felicity's collarbones than she was accustomed to displaying. Mrs. Chen insisted on proper accessories as well: black boots of supple leather, a matching wool shawl, and even small pearl earrings. "Mr. Taylor was most specific," the older woman explained when Felicity protested the expense. "He wanted you to have whatever you needed to feel comfortable at the celebration." By the time Saturday arrived, Felicity's initial reluctance had given way to nervous anticipation. She hadn't attended a proper social event since before her mother's death 5 years earlier, and the prospect was both exciting and intimidating. Frederick watched with paternal pride as she prepared, Mrs. Chen having come to the cabin to assist with her hair. "Your mother would be so pleased to see you like this," he observed. "She always said you'd grow into your beauty." Felicity blushed, unused to such compliments. "I feel rather silly, getting so dressed up for a simple town dance." "Nonsense," her father replied. "You've earned some pleasure after years of hardship. And if a certain ranch owner happens to appreciate the sight of you in that blue dress, well, that's hardly something to regret." Preston arrived promptly at 6, dressed in a formal suit that highlighted his own considerable appeal. His evident appreciation when he saw Felicity brought another flush to her cheeks. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "That color suits you perfectly." The drive to Helena in Preston's best buggy passed quickly, filled with easy conversation about ranch matters and local gossip. By the time they arrived at the hotel, Felicity's nervousness had largely subsided, replaced by a pleasant sense of anticipation. The hotel's main dining room had been transformed for the occasion, tables pushed against the walls to create a dance floor, lanterns hanging from the rafters, and a small band setting up in one corner. Many of Helena's prominent citizens were already present, the women in their finest dresses, the men in suits or formal Western wear. Felicity was surprised by how many people sought out Preston, greeting him warmly and expressing interest in the double circle's progress. He introduced her to each group graciously, always as Miss Zimmerman, our exceptionally talented horse trainer, never as a mere companion or employee. Dinner was served buffet-style platters of roast beef, chicken, and an array of side dishes far more elaborate than Felicity's usual fare. Preston guided her through the social niceties with unobtrusive help, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. When the band began playing and couples moved onto the dance floor, Preston turned to her with an expectant smile. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Zimmerman?" Felicity hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm woefully out of practice. It's been years since I attended any dance." "Then we shall relearn together," Preston replied, offering his hand. His confidence was not misplaced. Preston proved to be an accomplished dancer, guiding Felicity smoothly through a waltz with subtle pressure from his hand at her waist. The sensation of being held in his arms, moving in synchrony to the music, was unexpectedly affecting. Felicity found herself relaxing into his lead, enjoying the simple pleasure of the dance. "You dance very well for a ranch owner," she observed as they circled the floor. Preston's smile was wry. One of those Boston society skills that occasionally proves useful, even in Montana territory. They danced 3 more times, another waltz and 2 lively reels that left Felicity breathless and laughing. During a break, Preston brought her a cup of punch and guided her to a quieter corner of the room. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, studying her flushed face. "Very much," Felicity admitted. "I'd forgotten how pleasant such evenings can be." "You deserve many more of them," Preston said softly. "You've shouldered responsibilities that would have broken someone with less strength." Felicity looked away, uncomfortable with his perception. "I did what was necessary, nothing more." "Necessity doesn't diminish courage," Preston countered. "Selling Artemis must have been terribly difficult. Yet you did it without complaint, for your father's sake." The mention of that painful decision in such a happy setting jarred Felicity. "Why are you bringing that up now?" Preston's expression grew serious. "Because I want you to understand something. I didn't buy Artemis just because she was an exceptional horse, though she certainly is that." He paused. "I bought her because I saw your face when you brought her to auction. I recognized the depth of your sacrifice, and I needed to do something about it. Felicity stared at him, confused. What are you saying? I'm saying that from the moment I saw you at that auction, I've been drawn to you in ways I can't fully explain. Preston's voice was low, meant only for her ears. Your strength, your devotion to your father, the grace with which you handled such a painful situation, they affected me profoundly. You didn't even know me, Felicity protested. Sometimes recognition doesn't require years of acquaintance, Preston replied. Sometimes it happens in an instant. Before Felicity could formulate a response, they were interrupted by an older couple, the mayor and his wife, wanting to meet the charming young woman accompanying Preston Taylor. The moment passed, but Preston's words lingered in Felicity's mind throughout the remainder of the evening. The ride back to the double circle was quieter, the night air considerably cooler than when they had departed. Preston tucked a warm blanket around Felicity's legs and shoulders, his touch careful but lingering. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said, as the buggy rolled along the moonlit road. "Your presence made the evening far more enjoyable than it would have been otherwise." "I should be thanking you," Felicity replied, "for the invitation, the beautiful dress, everything." Preston glanced at her, his expression difficult to read in the dim light. "I would very much like to court you properly, Felicity Zimmerman, with your permission and your father's." The directness of the statement took her breath away. "Preston, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I understand this is unexpected. I only want you to know my intentions are serious and honorable." They completed the journey in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the cabin, Preston helped Felicity down from the buggy, his hands warm and steady at her waist. "Good night, Felicity," he said softly. "Thank you again for a wonderful evening." "Good night," she replied, suddenly shy, "and thank you for your honesty." Inside, she found her father still awake, reading by lamplight in his favorite chair. He looked up with knowing eyes. "Had a nice time, did you?" Felicity sank into the opposite chair, her mind still reeling. "Preston wants to court me, officially." Frederick set aside his book. "I'm not surprised. The man's been half in love with you since Helena." He studied his daughter's face. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" "I don't know," Felicity admitted. "He's kind, intelligent, clearly successful, but there's something else. Something about the way he looks at me, like he sees parts of me I didn't know were visible." "That sounds rather like the beginning of something significant," her father observed mildly, "but it's happening so quickly. We barely know each other." Frederick smiled gently. "Your mother and I knew each other exactly 3 weeks before I asked her to marry me. When it's right time is just a detail." Felicity thought of Artemis, of the instant connection she'd felt with the gangly 2-year-old filly her father had brought home. Some bonds didn't require time to form, they simply existed, waiting to be recognized. "I think I might care for him," she admitted softly. "But I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting someone else with my happiness, of building a life that depends on another person's constancy." Frederick reached across to take his daughter's hand. "That's the risk of loving, Felicity. But the alternative, never allowing yourself to be vulnerable, is a much sadder fate." Sleep eluded Felicity that night. She tossed restlessly, her mind filled with images from the evening. Preston's steady blue gaze, the secure pressure of his hand at her waist during their dance, the earnest timbre of his voice when he declared his intentions. By dawn, she had reached no firm conclusion, but felt a growing certainty that her life at the double circle had become about far more than horses or financial security. She rose early, drawn by habit to the stables. Artemis greeted her with familiar enthusiasm, nickering softly as Felicity entered her stall. The morning routine of grooming and feeding was soothing in its simplicity, requiring no difficult decisions or emotional analysis. What do you think, girl? Felicity murmured as she brushed Artemis's gleaming coat. Is your new owner someone I could trust with my heart? As if in answer, the mare turned her head to nuzzle Felicity's shoulder affectionately. Before she could interpret this equine endorsement, a voice from the stable doorway startled her. I hope that's a yes, Preston said, stepping into the lantern-lit interior. Though I realize horses may be biased judges of character, Felicity flushed, embarrassed at being overheard. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. Are we back to formalities already? He asked, approaching Artemis's stall. After last night, I'd hoped we might remain on a first-name basis. Preston, then, Felicity conceded. You're up early. Ranch work doesn't observe social hours, he replied with a small smile. And I confess I slept poorly. I was concerned I might have spoken too boldly last night. Felicity continued brushing Artemis, finding it easier to talk without meeting his gaze directly. Your honesty was unexpected but not unwelcome. Preston leaned against the stall door. Then may I hope you're considering my request to court you properly. Felicity set the brush aside and finally turned to face him. I am considering it, but I have questions first. Ask me anything, Preston said simply. If I agree, what exactly would that mean? For my position here, for my father's arrangement with you. Nothing would change regarding the professional aspects of our relationship, Preston assured her. Your father's position and yours remain secure regardless of any personal developments between us. Felicity nodded, relieved but not surprised by this answer. And what are your expectations? Of courting, I mean. Preston considered the question carefully. The opportunity to spend time together beyond our work interactions, to learn more about each other in settings that allow for personal conversation. Eventually, if things progress well, to discuss a more permanent arrangement. Marriage, Felicity stated bluntly. Yes, Preston acknowledged without hesitation. That would be my hope in time, but only if we find we suit each other as well as I believe we might. His directness was both disconcerting and refreshing. There was no artifice in Preston Taylor, none of the games or manipulations Felicity had observed in other men's courtships. I will need time, she said finally. This is all happening very quickly. Take all the time you need, Preston replied. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is the double circle. He paused, then added with a hint of his usual confidence, though I hope you won't take too long. Spring is coming, and I can think of few things more pleasant than riding the flowering meadows with you when the snow melts. The image was undeniably appealing, herself and Preston exploring the ranch's beautiful landscapes together, Artemis strong and responsive beneath her. A glimpse of what life could be, beyond duty and sacrifice. 1 week, Felicity decided. Give me 1 week to think about it properly. Preston's smile was warm with genuine pleasure. 1 week it is. He straightened from his leaning position. Now, much as I'd enjoy continuing this conversation, we both have work to attend to. I'll see you at dinner tonight. Your father mentioned you were both joining us at the main house. Yes, we'll be there, Felicity confirmed. After Preston departed, Felicity remained with Artemis, her thoughts tumultuous. The mare nudged her questioningly, as if sensing her distraction. It's complicated, girl, Felicity sighed, stroking the horse's neck. But I think you might already have decided for me, haven't you? The next few days passed in a curious mixture of routine and heightened awareness. Felicity performed her usual duties around the ranch, working with the horses, assisting her father with breeding records, helping prepare for spring activities. Preston was unfailingly professional during their work interactions, treating her with the same respect he showed all his valued employees. Yet there were moments, a lingering glance across the corral, the brush of his hand against hers when passing documents, the warmth in his voice when speaking directly to her that made it clear his feelings remained unchanged. He was giving her the space she'd requested, but his interest was unwavering. Frederick watched the subtle dance between them with barely disguised amusement. "For two intelligent people, you're making this unnecessarily complicated," he observed one evening as they sat by their cabin fireplace. "What do you mean?" Felicity asked, looking up from her mending. "You care for the man, he cares for you. The obstacles you're imagining exist primarily in your own mind." Felicity set aside her sewing. "It's not that simple, Pa, isn't it?" her father challenged gently. "Tell me honestly, what is it you're truly afraid of?" Felicity stared into the flames, considering the question. "I'm afraid of building a life around someone, only to discover I've made myself vulnerable to heartbreak." "That's the risk we all take when we love," Frederick replied. "Your mother and I faced the same uncertainty, but the alternative, never allowing yourself to love fully, is far more tragic." "I know," Felicity admitted, "but this is happening so quickly. I barely know him." Frederick's expression grew thoughtful. "What do you know about Artemis when you first met her?" The apparent non sequitur caught Felicity off guard. "What? That first day I brought her home, that gangly 2-year-old with more spirit than sense. What did you know about her?" "Nothing, really," Felicity replied, confused by the direction of the conversation. "Just that she was a quarter horse with good bloodlines." "Yet within an hour you were inseparable," her father pointed out. "You recognized something in her that resonated with you, her spirit, her intelligence, her heart. You trusted that recognition without questioning it." Understanding dawned. "You're saying it's the same with Preston?" "I'm saying that sometimes we recognize compatibility immediately, whether with a horse or a person. The head may need time to analyze and confirm, but the heart often knows right away." Frederick leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've watched you with Preston Taylor. There's an ease between you, a natural harmony that can't be manufactured or forced. That's rare, Felicity, and valuable." Felicity considered her father's words long after he'd retired for the night. There was truth in what he'd said. She had felt a connection with Preston from their earliest meetings, a sense of recognition that defied logical explanation. Even when she'd resented him for purchasing Artemis, she couldn't deny his fundamental decency or the strange pull she felt in his presence. The following morning, she rose before dawn, drawn to the stables by a need for the clarity she always found in Artemis's company. The mare greeted her with sleepy affection, leaning into Felicity's touch as she began the familiar routine of grooming. "Pa thinks I'm overthinking this," Felicity murmured as she worked. "He might be right." As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the stable floor, Felicity made her decision. The fear of vulnerability remained, but it was outweighed by the growing certainty that Preston Taylor was a man worth taking a chance on. She found him in the main house study after breakfast, reviewing cattle purchase agreements with Mr. Hollister. When she knocked on the open door, both men looked up. "Miss Zimmerman," Preston greeted her, a careful neutrality in his voice. "Did you need something?" "A moment of your time, if convenient," she replied, equally formal. Hollister gathered the papers quickly. "We're about done here anyway, boss. I'll check on those fence repairs and get back to you later." Once they were alone, Preston gestured to a chair opposite his desk. "Please sit." Felicity remained standing. "I've been thinking about your request to court me." Preston's expression revealed nothing, though his knuckles whitened slightly where his hands rested on the desk. "And have you reached a decision?" "Yes," Felicity said simply. "My answer is yes." For a moment, Preston didn't move. Then a smile of such genuine delight transformed his features that Felicity felt her breath catch. He stood and moved around the desk to stand before her. "You're certain?" he asked, searching her face. "I don't want you to feel pressured by our working relationship or your father's position here." "I'm certain," Felicity confirmed, "though I still have conditions." Preston's smile didn't falter. "Name them." "We proceed slowly. I need time to know you better before considering anything more permanent." "Agreed," Preston nodded. "What else?" "Our professional relationship remains separate from our personal one. When we're working, I'm still your horse trainer, not whatever else I might become." "Absolutely," Preston agreed seriously. "I would expect nothing less. Any other conditions?" Felicity hesitated, then added her final stipulation. "Be patient with me. This is unfamiliar territory." Preston's expression softened. He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "Felicity Zimmerman, I have waited 5 months for this opportunity. Patience is a quality I have in abundance, at least where you're concerned." The warmth of his hands around hers and the sincerity in his blue eyes stirred emotions Felicity had kept carefully guarded. "Then we have an agreement, Mr. Taylor." "Preston," he corrected softly. "At least when we're not discussing ranch business." "Preston," Felicity amended, finding she liked the sound of his name on her lips. He lifted her hand and with old-fashioned courtesy pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you for trusting me with this chance. I promise I won't disappoint you." Spring arrived in Montana Territory with its usual capricious nature, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, muddy roads giving way to dusty tracks within hours. The double circle bustled with seasonal activities, calving, planting, and preparing for the first horse breeding of Preston's ambitious program. Amid the work, Preston courted Felicity with thoughtful attention to her expressed wish for a gradual progression. Their time together included riding expeditions to explore the ranch's farthest reaches, quiet evenings of reading and conversation in the main house library, and occasional trips to Helena for supplies that inevitably included small pleasures like dining at the hotel restaurant. Frederick observed their growing closeness with paternal satisfaction, offering subtle encouragement without intrusive questions. His own health continued to improve with the milder weather and regular medication, allowing him to take a more active role in the ranch's horse program. The first mares were bred according to his carefully developed plan, with Artemis scheduled to meet the Carpenter stallion in late April. "She's in prime condition," Frederick assured Preston as they inspected the mare one morning in early April. "This breeding should produce an exceptional foal." Preston nodded, though his attention seemed divided. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you, Mr. Zimmerman, a matter of some importance." Frederick raised an eyebrow. "Sounds serious. Should we go to your study?" "Perhaps that would be best," Preston agreed. Once settled in the privacy of the main house study, Preston poured 2 small glasses of brandy, handing one to Frederick. "This conversation feels like it calls for something stronger than coffee." Frederick accepted the glass with a knowing smile. "I suspect I know what this is about, son." Preston took a steadying breath. "I would like your permission to ask for Felicity's hand in marriage." "Took you long enough," Frederick replied mildly. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd lost your nerve." Preston smiled ruefully. "I promised her we would proceed slowly, get to know each other properly. It's been nearly 3 months since we began courting officially." "And are you certain she's ready for this step?" Frederick asked, suddenly serious. "My daughter guards her heart carefully. It would pain me to see her retreat if you push too quickly." "I believe she is," Preston replied with quiet confidence, "but I would never proceed without your blessing." Frederick studied the younger man thoughtfully. "You've proven yourself a man of integrity, Preston. You've treated both Felicity and me with respect and generosity, More importantly, I've seen how you look at my daughter the same way I looked at her mother for 30 years. Is that a yes? Preston asked. It is, Frederick confirmed, with one condition of my own. Name it. Make Artemis a wedding gift to my daughter. Return what she sacrificed for my sake. Preston's expression registered surprise, followed by understanding. You knew. That you bought Artemis intending to eventually return her to Felicity. I suspected as much. It seemed too convenient, your appearance at the auction, your generous bid, your subsequent interest in our family. I saw her at Dr. Morgan's office first, Preston admitted. The day before the auction, when I overheard why she was selling the horse, something inside me couldn't bear it. I had to do something. Frederick nodded. So you bought Artemis at an outrageous price, then created a position for me that would bring Felicity close to both you and her beloved horse. It sounds calculating when you put it that way, Preston said uncomfortably. I assure you the position was genuine. Your expertise has been invaluable to the double circle. Oh, I know that. Frederick waved away the concern. But let's be honest, your interest in my daughter preceded your interest in my horse knowledge. Preston couldn't deny it. Yes. But everything that followed was sincere, Mr. Zimmerman. My feelings for Felicity developed naturally through knowing her, not from some romantic notion formed at first sight. I believe you, Frederick assured him, and I approve of your original impulse. It showed compassion and generosity, qualities my daughter deserves in a husband. He sipped his brandy. So, will you honor my condition? Return Artemis to Felicity as a wedding gift. With pleasure, Preston agreed immediately. Though legally, the mare has been hers since January. Frederick's eyebrows shot up. What? I transferred ownership to Felicity when you both agreed to come to the double circle, Preston explained. The papers are in my safe. I was waiting for the right moment to tell her. A slow smile spread across Frederick's weathered face. You are full of surprises, Preston Taylor. He raised his glass in a toast. To my future son-in-law, may you always keep a few steps ahead of my clever daughter. The perfect opportunity for Preston's proposal presented itself the following weekend. The early spring weather turned unexpectedly fine, with clear skies and mild temperatures that made the Montana countryside burst with new growth. Preston suggested a day ride to a particularly beautiful spot on the double circle's southern boundary, a high meadow overlooking a winding creek where wildflowers had begun to carpet the ground. Felicity readily agreed, happy for a day away from the increasingly busy ranch. They set out after breakfast, Preston on his black gelding, Felicity riding Artemis. They carried a picnic lunch prepared by Mrs. Chen and plenty of water for both themselves and the horses. The ride to the meadow took nearly 2 hours, but the journey itself was pleasant, the trail winding through stands of pine, across small creeks swollen with snowmelt, and through valleys where new grass had begun to emerge. They talked easily about ranch matters, books they'd both read, and plans for the coming summer. The meadow is just ahead, Preston said as they crested a final ridge. It's one of my favorite spots on the entire ranch. As they emerged from the tree line, Felicity gasped at the view. The meadow stretched before them, already dotted with early wildflowers, blue lupines, yellow arrowleaf balsamroot, and delicate white spring beauties. Beyond it, the land fell away into a valley where a creek meandered through stands of aspen just beginning to leaf out. In the distance, snow-capped mountains formed a majestic backdrop against the clear blue sky. It's beautiful, Felicity breathed, reining Artemis to a halt beside Preston. I discovered it last fall, Preston said, dismounting and moving to help Felicity down. I knew then that I wanted to share it with you when spring came. They secured the horses where they could graze on the new grass, then spread a blanket in a sunny spot with the best view of the valley. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the picnic fried chicken, bread and cheese, apple tarts, and a flask of sweet lemonade. As they ate, Preston seemed uncharacteristically distracted, his gaze repeatedly drawn to the saddlebag still hanging from his gelding saddle. "Is something wrong?" Felicity finally asked, noticing his preoccupation. "Not wrong," Preston assured her quickly. There's something I need to discuss with you." Felicity set aside her half-eaten tart, suddenly alert to the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Preston reached for her hand, his own surprisingly cool despite the warm day. "These past months have been the happiest of my life, Felicity. Getting to know you, watching you with the horses, seeing your relationship with your father, it's all confirmed what I suspected from our first meeting." "And what was that?" Felicity asked softly, though she suspected she knew the answer. "That you are an extraordinary woman, strong, principled, fiercely loving to those fortunate enough to earn your loyalty." Preston's blue eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "I came west seeking a new beginning, something I could build with my own hands and heart. I found that in the double circle, but I found something far more precious in you." He released her hand and stood, walking to his horse to retrieve something from the saddlebag. When he returned, he held a small wooden box and a rolled document tied with ribbon. "Felicity Zimmerman," he said, kneeling beside the blanket. "I am asking you to be my wife, to build a life with me here, to make the double circle not just a successful ranch but a true home." He opened the box, revealing a ring unlike any Felicity had seen in Montana territory, a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, set in delicate gold. "This was my grandmother's," Preston explained. "The only family heirloom I brought west with me." Felicity stared at the beautiful ring, then at Preston's earnest face, her heart racing. Despite the hints and gradual progression of their courtship, the reality of this moment, Preston Taylor asking for her hand, offering her a future beyond anything she dared imagine, overwhelmed her. "Preston, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he suggested with a tentative smile. "Or if you need more time, tell me that. But know that my feelings won't change, no matter how long you need." Felicity looked past him to where Artemis grazed contentedly beside Preston's gelding. The two horses had developed their own companionable relationship over the months, much like their riders. There was something right about the picture they made together, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "I don't need more time," Felicity said, returning her gaze to Preston's anxious face. "My answer is yes." The joy that transformed Preston's features was worth any lingering doubt she might have harbored. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her, then leaned forward to kiss her for the first time. A gentle touch of lips that deepened when Felicity responded with unexpected fervor. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Preston remembered the rolled document still in his hand. "I have a wedding gift for you," he said, handing it to her. "Though legally, it's simply acknowledging something that's already true." Puzzled, Felicity untied the ribbon and unrolled the paper. It was a formal bill of sale and transfer of ownership for Artemis, dated January 5, 1879, the day she and Frederick had arrived at the double circle. The mare had been transferred to Felicity Zimmerman for the sum of $1. "I don't understand," Felicity said, looking up in confusion. "You're giving Artemis back to me. She's been legally yours since January," Preston explained. "I transferred ownership as soon as you agreed to come to the double circle." "But why didn't you tell me?" Preston's expression turned sheepish. "At first, I wasn't sure how you'd react. I was afraid you might see it as charity or manipulation. Then, as we grew closer, I decided to save it for a special occasion." He paused. "Your father suggested it would make an appropriate wedding gift." "Pa knew about this?" Felicity asked incredulously. "He guessed most of it," Preston admitted. "He's a perceptive man." Felicity stared at the document, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You already said the only thing that matters," Preston reminded her, touching the ring on her finger. "The rest is just details." Felicity launched herself into his arms, knocking him backward onto the blanket with the force of her embrace. "Thank you," she whispered against his neck. "For Artemis, for everything." Preston held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I should be thanking you, Felicity Zimmerman, for trusting me with your heart." They were married in late May when the Montana landscape was at its most beautiful. The ceremony took place on the double circle, with an arbor constructed especially for the occasion in the garden Mrs. Chen had established behind the main house. Reverend Phillips came from Helena to officiate, and the guest list included most of the prominent ranching families in the area, as well as Dr. Morgan, Mrs. Holbrook, and other friends from town. Felicity wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, with a veil her mother had worn at her own wedding. Frederick, stronger than he had been in years, walked his daughter down the aisle with tears of joy barely contained in his eyes. Preston waited beneath the flower-decked arbor, his expression a mixture of awe and happiness as Felicity approached. The vows were simple and heartfelt, exchanged with clear voices that carried across the assembled guests. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up startled birds from nearby trees. Even Artemis, watching from a paddock near the garden, seemed to approve, nickering loudly at the sound of Felicity's laughter as Preston swept her into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up on the lawn, lanterns hung from trees, and a small band playing for dancing. Preston and Felicity moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with gracious happiness. "You've done well for yourself, Miss Zimmerman, or rather, Mrs. Taylor now," Dr. Morgan said when he came to offer his good wishes. "Though I confess, I had my suspicions about Mr. Taylor's interest from that first day in my office." Felicity looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" The doctor's eyes twinkled. "The way he looked at you when you were discussing your father's medicine, it wasn't just admiration for your dedication, there was something more there, even then." Later, as the celebration began to wind down, Felicity found a moment alone with her father. Frederick sat in a comfortable chair at the edge of the festivities, watching the dancers with contentment. "Happy, Pa?" she asked, sitting beside him. "More than I can say," he replied, taking her hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Felicity. And she would have approved of Preston, I think." "I wish she could be here," Felicity said softly. "She is in her way," Frederick assured her. "In the strength you found to carry on after losing her, in the love you're now brave enough to accept." He glanced toward Preston, who was bidding farewell to departing guests. "He's a good man. The kind who returns a beloved horse because he understands what she means to you." Felicity smiled. "Did you suspect his plan from the beginning?" "Not at first," Frederick admitted. "But I began to wonder when he seemed more interested in our well-being than strictly made sense for a business arrangement." He squeezed her hand. "Life has a way of bringing unexpected blessings, daughter, sometimes through the very sacrifices we thought would break our hearts." As the last guests departed and the ranch hands began clearing away tables, Preston found his bride sitting with her father. "May I steal my wife for a moment?" he asked Frederick. "I have one last surprise for her." Frederick waved them off with a smile. "Go on." I'm perfectly content right here with this excellent brandy and my memories of a beautiful day. Preston led Felicity toward the stables, which had been left lit with lanterns for the evening. "Where are we going?" she asked curiously. "You'll see," Preston replied mysteriously. Inside the stable, all was quiet except for the occasional soft nicker of a horse disturbed by their entrance. Preston guided Felicity to Artemis's stall, where the mare greeted them with sleepy interest. "I thought you might want to say good night to her," Preston explained, "and to give her this." He produced a sugar cube from his pocket. Felicity laughed, taking the treat and offering it to Artemis, who accepted it with delicate precision. "You know me well, husband." "I intend to know you better with each passing day, wife," Preston replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she stroked Artemis's velvet nose. Starting with a proper honeymoon, Felicity turned in his embrace. Honeymoon. But the spring breeding program, the new foals coming, can be managed by your father and Hollister for 2 weeks, Preston finished for her. "I've arranged everything. We leave for Denver tomorrow morning." "Denver!" Felicity exclaimed. "But that's so far," Preston silenced her with a kiss. "Not too far for a proper honeymoon. Besides, I want to show you something of the world beyond Montana territory. And Denver has the finest hotel west of Chicago." Felicity couldn't argue with the appeal of the plan, though part of her worried about leaving the ranch during such a busy season. "Are you sure Pa will be all right managing things?" "Absolutely certain," Preston assured her. "In fact, it was his suggestion. He said, and I quote, 'Get that girl away from horses for at least a week so she remembers there's more to life.'" Felicity laughed, recognizing her father's blunt wisdom. "Well, when you put it that way." They did indeed travel to Denver, spending 2 glorious weeks exploring the growing city, attending the theater, dining in fine restaurants, and enjoying the privacy of their hotel suite. For Felicity, who had never traveled beyond Montana territory, the experience was eye-opening and exhilarating. When they returned to the Double Circle in early June, they found the ranch thriving under Frederick and Hollister's capable management. The spring breeding program had proceeded exactly as planned, with 5 mares, including Artemis, successfully bred to carefully selected stallions. Summer passed in a blur of ranch work and domestic adjustments. Felicity and Preston moved into the main house, though they often visited Frederick in the foreman's cabin, where he insisted on remaining despite their invitation to join them. "Newlyweds need privacy," he declared firmly, "and I've grown attached to my little home. It suits me." By autumn, the Double Circle's reputation for quality horses had spread throughout the territory. Preston's business acumen combined with Frederick's expertise created a breeding program that attracted buyers from as far as Wyoming and the Dakota Territory. Felicity's skill with training the young stock added further value to their offerings. It was also in autumn that Felicity confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child, due in late spring. Preston's joy at the news was boundless, and Frederick's gruff emotion betrayed how deeply the prospect of a grandchild affected him. "Another generation for the Double Circle," the older man said, voice suspiciously thick. "Your mother would be so pleased, Felicity." Winter arrived early that year, with heavy snows by November that confined ranch activities largely to the immediate vicinity of the buildings. Felicity, her condition beginning to show, divided her time between household management and the less strenuous aspects of horse care. Preston insisted on accompanying her whenever she visited the stables, protective of her in a way that was both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one December afternoon as they walked arm in arm from the main house to check on Artemis, who was now visibly carrying her own foal. "Indulge me," Preston replied, helping her navigate an icy patch. "It's my first time being an expectant father." Artemis greeted them with her usual enthusiasm, though her movements were more measured now that she was heavy with foal. Felicity stroked the mare's distended side, feeling the occasional flutter of movement within. "She's doing beautifully," Preston observed. "Your father says her foal should arrive in March, right before the spring rush begins." "Two new lives coming to the double circle," Felicity said softly, placing her free hand on her own growing belly. "I hope they'll be friends, Artemis's foal and our baby." Preston wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I have no doubt they will be. If our child inherits even half your affinity for horses, Artemis and her offspring will be constant companions." The winter passed slowly, as Montana winters tend to do, but the Taylors found happiness in simple pleasures evenings by the fire reading aloud to each other. Sunday dinners with Frederick in the main house, planning for both the ranch's future and their growing family. Felicity worked on a cradle quilt while Preston expanded their library to include children's books ordered from Denver. March brought the arrival of Artemis's foal, a strong, leggy colt with his mother's intelligent eyes and his sire's powerful build. Felicity, now in her 8th month of pregnancy and moving with deliberate care, spent hours in the stable watching the new mother and her offspring. "He's perfect," she told Preston and Frederick as they joined her one evening. "Look how he follows her every movement. He'll be smart like Artemis." "What will you name him?" Preston asked. Felicity considered the question seriously. "Apollo," she decided, "brother to Artemis in mythology and just as magnificent." April arrived with its characteristic blend of lingering winter and determined spring. The mountains remained snow-capped, but the valleys greened rapidly, and the double circle bustled with preparation for the coming season. New calves populated the pastures, spring planting commenced in the fields, and the horse breeding program prepared for another successful year. On a mild evening in late April, with the sunset painting the mountains gold and pink, Felicity Taylor gave birth to a healthy son. Preston paced anxiously outside their bedroom as Dr. Morgan and Mrs. Chen attended to the delivery, with Frederick keeping him company with steady reassurances. When the baby's first cry pierced the evening quiet, both men froze. Minutes later, Dr. Morgan emerged with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Taylor. You have a fine son and your wife is doing splendidly." Preston's legs nearly gave way with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course." "They're waiting for you." Inside the bedroom, Felicity sat propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as Preston entered, her smile so full of love it made his heart ache. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Preston approached the bed with reverent steps, perching carefully beside her to peer at the tiny face nestled in the blanket. The baby's eyes were closed, his small features still red and somewhat squashed from birth, but to Preston, he was the most beautiful sight imaginable. "He's perfect," Preston whispered, reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand with one finger. The baby's fingers reflexively curled around it, gripping with surprising strength. "He has your chin," Felicity observed, "and I think your eyes, though it's hard to tell yet. What shall we call him?" Preston asked, unable to look away from the miracle they had created. Felicity had given this considerable thought during the long months of pregnancy. "I was thinking Matthew Frederick Taylor," she said. "Matthew means gift from God and Frederick for my father." Preston tested the name, finding it strong and fitting. "Matthew Frederick Taylor, a perfect name for our son." He leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to Felicity's forehead. "Thank you for this extraordinary gift, my love." Frederick was invited in to meet his namesake, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held his grandson for the first time. "He has the Zimmerman nose," the older man declared with satisfaction. "Poor lad." The following weeks brought the double circle into full spring, with new life evident everywhere. Young Matthew thrived under the devoted attention of his parents, developing a healthy appetite and a distinct personality that showed itself in his determined gaze and occasional stubborn refusal to sleep when expected. By June, Felicity had recovered enough to resume limited duties around the ranch, often carrying Matthew in a sling as she supervised the training of young horses or checked on Artemis and Apollo. The mare was protective of her colt, but seemed to recognize Matthew as part of her extended family, allowing the infant close proximity when Felicity brought him to the paddock. "They'll grow up together," Felicity told Preston one evening as they sat on the main house porch, watching the sunset while Matthew slept peacefully in her arms. "Apollo will be Matthew's horse someday, I think." "A fitting partnership," Preston agreed. The son of Artemis carrying the son of Artemis's devoted owner. Felicity leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Did you ever imagine when you bid on her at that auction that we would end up here?" Preston's arm tightened around her. "I hoped," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you with her, so torn between necessity and love, I wanted to find a way to ease your burden. I couldn't have predicted exactly how our story would unfold, but I knew I wanted to be part of your life somehow." "You gave me back far more than just my horse," Felicity said softly, looking down at their sleeping son. "You returned possibilities I thought were lost forever." "And you gave me a true home," Preston replied, kissing the top of her head. "Something I didn't realize I was searching for until I found it with you." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, the three of them together with Artemis and Apollo visible in the nearby paddock, a family created through sacrifice, compassion, and love. The beloved horse that had once been the price of a father's life had returned, bringing with her the heart of a good man. And together, they had built something that would endure far beyond the wildest dreams of a young woman who had once faced the hardest choice of her life at a frontier horse auction. In the years that followed, the double circle flourished, as did the Taylor family. Matthew was joined by a sister 2 years later, little Clara Rose, who inherited her mother's affinity for horses and her father's determined spirit. Frederick lived to see both his grandchildren grow into their early teens, his last years filled with the joy of passing his horse knowledge to a new generation. And Artemis, the mare at the heart of their story, produced 5 exceptional foals over her breeding years before retiring to a life of honored ease in the double circle's finest pasture. Her descendants became the foundation of what would eventually be recognized as one of the finest quarter horse breeding programs in the West. Preston and Felicity Taylor's love story became something of a legend in Montana territory, how a desperate sacrifice led to unexpected happiness, how a horse brought together 2 hearts that might otherwise never have found each other. It was a reminder that even in the harsh realities of frontier life, compassion and love could transform lives in ways no one could predict. And on quiet evenings, long after their children were grown with families of their own, Preston and Felicity would still sometimes ride out together, he on his faithful black gelding, she on Artemis's granddaughter, to watch the sunset from that same meadow where he had proposed so many years before. Their hearts as full and their love as strong as it had been on that spring day when a beloved horse and a good man's heart had come home to stay.